What was the thing in India that it was a metal bat?
Spring in the bat.
Springs in the bat. Is actually nanotechnology.
TV umpire to director, we have a player review. Can we rock and roll, please?
Hello and welcome to Bits and Pieces, the friendliest cricket podcast. This is the podcast that unabashedly asks the question, how's that? To which normally people respond with, not very promising. But what we lack for in sensibility of appeal, we also don't make up for with sex appeal. Oh boy, it's going to be an uphill task from here to sell this pod to you because it's all downhill from here. Wait, why do uphill and downhill mean the same thing? Damn the English. Our fact checker has just buzzed in my ear to say that uphill and downhill don't mean the same thing as exemplified by the slope at Lord's. I see no way of redeeming this pig slop of an intro. So before we put our listeners into fits, why don't we quickly end this blitz sans glitz that sits well with no one? We will call it an innovation of sorts, a bits ball, if you will. This is episode 55. And I am Tony. And for some reason, they're still letting me do this. But thankfully, I am joined by my more talented friends who shall now pull off the impossible and beat these long odds. First up, back from a hiatus to say hi at us, the Beetle from Seattle. Beatle from Seattle? That's right. Reset the dartboard because the cart lord is here. He's going to look into the bull's eye and hit a bullseye. Actually, he's not going to hit a bullseye because he knows a triple 20 is worth more. The needle of the moral compass of Bits and Pieces, the train spotting, plane slotting, brain totting, cartographer. Say hi, Cart.
Hi. Very nice to be back after what seems like a century almost, but anyway.
A Kohli century.
A Kohli century, that's right. Yeah.
Up next, someone whose trajectory I've had the pleasure of witnessing from a fresher to a crusher, from a bud to a stud, the man about whom they sang, if you like it, you should have put 5 rings on it. The only Indian who has represented India at the Summer and Winter Olympics. If cricket commentary mirrored the sport, one of the few who could have played all 3 formats because he has the range for the ridiculous, the consistent, and the endless grind. The man with an amazing wealth of knowledge. Please say hi, the Trichy Rich of Bits and Pieces, Srinath Sripath.
Oh my God, that last bit killed me, man. This completely destroyed my early morning.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you.
Before Fidel logs off, I think we should move this swiftly.
Don't NIT pick your intro, da.
Up next, what do you get if you combine a love for food and a voracious bookworm? The very hungry caterpillar of this podcast. Your daily dose of books and snacks. Sorry, that should have said the daily dose. Or is it dosha or dosa? It doesn't matter because this wise man will never put chutney jerk reactions. The docile dosa missile who doesn't care about your domicile. It doesn't matter if it is Karnataka or Tamil Nadu. Our man says, swag se karege sabka sambar. Say hi, Sambar Mohan. Sorry, Samir Mohan.
Hi. Thank you for referencing my most recent viral tweet, Tony. Thank you.
Okay, up next, they say about Bits and Pieces that no man is an island. Sorry, that was no man is silent. But amidst all this chaos so violent is a man with calm like a highland. It's never a notice period, not I spirit with this cool customer. The HR flag bearer who knows when to shut up and when to go long form. The equanimous adjudicator of timeline medals who also knows when to push the pedal to the metal. A man of such great balance that many call him the unicycling unicorn of Bits and Pieces. Say hi, Abhishek Chopra.
I'll have to listen to this intro on the actual pod to understand it completely. This is just too much.
If you're expecting me to make sense, you've never been on the pod before. So.
I just want to say our intros have gotten so long that a man who's made his career watching India Sri Lanka play each other had to take a swig of what I can only think is arak of the highest quality to make it through this. But okay.
No, but I should say at this point, he's definitely used to Sri Lankan national anthems before the actual match starts. So he's okay with this. And moving swiftly on, last but definitely not the least, the reason we are all so excited for this podcast episode, our very special friend for the day, a man who deep dives into the ocean of cricket without a mask or oxygen and brings back boisterous oysters and then shucks them to unfurl pearls of love and laughter. A man who travels across the sleepless isle and greets you with an A+ smile. He looks at the maddening silliness of the world and cricket and says, "Chuck it in the fuck it bucket," and turns his griefings into hilarious briefings for us. He was described by his Booker Prize-winning friend and cricket lover Shehan Karnatilaka as the funniest chronicle of the island. Please welcome, for the first ever time on Bits and Pieces, the Oracle of Fidelf. Say hi, Fidel Fernando.
Hi guys. Hey, thanks. That's a very elaborate and well-researched intro, by the way. But I don't agree with what you said earlier about the not having sex appeal. Some of us are working on our dad bods. I hear that's in right now.
This is worse than the 952 for 6.
Yeah. Fidel bringing the sex appeal and the cricket appeal to this pod. Welcome, Fidel. Have you ever had the misfortune of listening to this podcast?
I have listened to it a few times. Big fan of the kind of keeping it loose and riotous kind of vibe. So I'm very, very excited to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
Amazing. This is much better than us because we famously get on this pod without having watched any of the cricket and make it up as we go along. So this is going to be a different experience for us.
It's an alternative history of cricket. It's a cricket podcast for people who don't watch cricket. I love it.
We call ourselves the Neville Cardis of cricket podcast. That's our tagline.
My favorite Fidel piece has always been Left Arm Loveable. I don't know how many times I've read it, how many times I've referenced it on Twitter, and I've tagged Fidel in it. And I want to read out the last bit of it, which is the most favorite part. He was in good spirits when I saw him a few weeks after that match at Sri Lanka Cricket's annual awards. Angelo Matthews had announced after that Galle win that Herath had been training hard to get trim. Standing before me in a black suit, a Best Test Bowler award under his arm, he seemed more streamlined than usual. "Congratulations, Rangana Ayya," I said. "You're looking good. How many kilos did you lose? 3? 4? His smile vanished. He looked at me as if I was some kind of idiot. "You can't just lose weight like that, Malli," he said. "I have lost about 1 kilo. And that's where he ends it.
Hashtag sex appeal.
Hashtag dad bod.
My favorite thing about that memory was just the look of disdain in his eyes at me having like the idea of like losing 3 or 4 kilos just being like just such a dumb idea to even throw at somebody. And he was just like, "What are you talking about? I've lost 1 kilo. Like the 3 or 4, don't get crazy, and he's one of the nicest and one of the most like generally the most affable people. Yeah. But I remember like that's just like, I just remember the look he gave me, just being one of like disdain for the question. Like, you're such an idiot to be even asking it. So I loved it.
So my question, Fidel, was, I've enjoyed all your pieces on the cricketers of Sri Lanka that, we've grown up watching, and perhaps in larger sense, articles about Sri Lankan cricket. Because as close as it seems to be to us in India, it's a different world of cricket out there. And, we've also heard stories of how after match fixing, etc., at least in India, journalists didn't have that kind of access to Indian cricketers, etc. So they were writing from a distance. And in your writing, we seem to find, that connect still being there. What is your process of interviewing these cricketers? How far back do you go with them? And how do you bring it out in the articles? And also, when you have to critique them at times, which perhaps is often given Sri Lanka's recent record, how do you manage to sort of strike that balance? And of course, at the end of all of it, you end up being hilarious as well. So just wanted to understand what's your process of writing like, since it's so different.
Yeah, I find that, Sri Lankan cricketers are generally there's less of a bubble around them. There's less of a, I think in India, you can be surrounded by people who are kind of like worshipping just because of the scale of it. The number of people who'd be around you always sing your praises. The number of people who are making money off you. Cricket is such big business in India that I think there is a big bigger disconnect between the players and the public. And so there is kind of there is perhaps a more harsh tone taken towards people who are critical of them. Perhaps, there are so many people saying great things about you in your ear that Indian cricket has kind of become very, in some ways, maybe a little bit thinner skinned, whereas in Sri Lanka, people would yell insults at you on the road. And that is a story that every single Sri Lankan cricketer has. People just like being like, oh, what was that shot you played in the last match? Like, you know, like that is a very normal thing to happen in Colombo. And Sri Lankan fans are very fickle. So like you could have won, you know, they won the Asia Cup obviously in September. The same group of cricketers.
Nice way to slide that in. In case
just in case you Indians forgot, you know, you were beaten in the Asia Cup. But no, it's very, and like now the same group of cricketers are getting, you know, they were like got this huge reception. They were kind of like beloved, and then it lasted like a week, and then suddenly you were just like it turned back to just being like, if you play a bad shot, if you bowl a bad over, if you, you know, do something terrible in the field, you start getting abused again. So I think there is kind of like a different relationship between the Sri Lankan players and their public, where they're a little bit more receptive to criticism, but just because they see it every day. So I think that makes it easy. Also, like I generally like to write about players towards the end of their career, because I find that part of their career is the most interesting to me as a writer. I mean, with Herath, Sangakkara, they're kind of looking back on a cricketing life, and there is like such a richness of material to draw from. My two favorites were Rangan and Herath, just because I love talking to him, and he was probably the player that I love writing about in totality the most so far in my cricketing kind of writing life. And the other one was Lasith Malinga, who was also like, when I wrote
also body positive.
Him, yes, yeah, very. Both of them were in there. Definitely, I mean, Malinga had a skinny stage. He was definitely growing into his belly when I interviewed him. And both like pretty average fielders. Just like the idea of like a cricketer who's been on top of the world confronting the end of their career and their kind of like their cricketing mortality, if that makes sense. Is a fascinating like process, I think, for players to go through. So again, there's like such a richness of content you can go through if you really get close with the player and you interview them and really ask them, you know, these hard questions about how they really feel about their careers now. You're going to get much more interesting answers than if you interview like, you know, the next up and coming 25-year-old. That's not to say, you know, there haven't been great writers. I think like someone like an Osman Samyuddin, I remember him reading an article on Muhammad Asif from him back in like, I think it was like 2007, 2008, when Asif was just like and those can be fantastic pieces too, but perhaps the ones that I have specialized in a little bit are the older players. And the other thing is the older players like are much more chilled. You know, they've been through the media kind of environment many times, and they know that, you know, someone who's going to write about you is not always going to write nicely about you, and that's, you know, they don't take it personally. So all of that kind of helps that, you know, I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, no, so Fidel, so I mean, basically you're basically saying that Indians tend to go into a shell and we are the crustaceans of the marine world, as it were. And Sri Lankans are basically fish, right? And also to reference the other part of Chehan's blurb for you, it said, you're Australia's worst fisherman. Right. And like to sort of make my dad happy, let me reference a Bible quote, which I'm translating from Malayalam, where Jesus basically looks at one of his disciples and says, let me change you into a catcher of men. So, you know, maybe can you share with us a few stories of how you got not necessarily close to some Sri Lankan cricketers, but, you know, your favorite stories around some of the great Sri Lankan cricketers you've had a chance of interacting with?
Angelo Matthews is pretty, has, you know, trimmed down substantially over the last couple of years, and is kind of a very fit version of himself. But there was that period when he was, you know, carrying a little bit extra. He and I have had a long conversation about him talking about how much he likes food, and it had got to the stage where I was kind of, even when he did well, I would say, you know, I would kind of make references to his weight, and sometimes say, you know, like, it's okay, Sri Lankan cricket always needs to have a chubby guy in the team. You know, you had Arjuna, you had Arvinder, you had you know, Herath, Malinga. There's always got to be like, Sri Lankan cricket's always happy when there's like a slightly overweight guy in the team. And I had said that of Angelo, and once it was in the middle of a goal test, and I'd gone out to eat in the goal fort, and who do I run into but Angelo having an ice cream, and then like I think he made a comment being like, "Oh, we're just like," it was like he kind of suddenly got like very self-conscious that I, the guy who had written about this, was seeing him like having an ice cream, and he's like, "Oh, this is just I'm just having one," or like we just came out once in a while.
The Mickey
just while
Arthur face, Fidel?
just while passing me. No, this is pre Mickey Arthur. Oh, no, under Mickey Arthur they wouldn't do any of that. There was a very strict
homework
diet regimen when Mickey was there. But yeah, I remember that being kind of a funny moment. Like I obviously don't begrudge Angela having one ice cream. It's like it's a very normal human thing to want. But I do remember him feeling like feeling self-conscious that like I was watching him literally eat an ice cream and probably wondering like what I was going to write about the next day. But he's very chill. Again, like one of those players who has become, as he gets older, has become kind of more relaxed about media stuff. I remember like him once very early in my career, him being like very terse with me. I think he'd scored some runs, and in one of my articles, it was an article largely praising him, but had made a reference to the fact that it was very early on in his captaincy, very early on in my writing career, made a reference to the fact that he hadn't been kind of leading from the front, and this was an example of him turning that around. But he didn't like the fact that I referenced him not leading from the front. And then he like called me out in the middle of a press conference with like 20, 30 other journalists, and I remember feeling like quite like attacked. Again, I was like quite insecure about who I was as a writer as well at that point. But so it's nice to see. It was fun to have like that change in relationship over time with him, where I could write what I want, but eventually perhaps and now like he's very chill, very relaxed. But I think it's just a case of like both the writer and the player becoming more mature and kind of understanding each other and the kind of role we play in each other's lives, I guess, to some extent, a little bit better. And yeah, it's been cool watching his career progress, and I've loved writing about him too.
It's one thing for cricketers, Fidel, to seek you out, and I think that happens a lot in Pakistan as well. Apart from Sri Lanka, I see parallels with Osman and some cricketers of various vintage approaching him. The big difference with India that we see is the board tends to get in the way to a whole different level that we don't really appreciate when we see, your writing, for example. You've always consistently been super honest. You've been really, open and calling out when the SLC does SLC things. And that's probably one of the favorite parts of your writing that we look forward to in terms of the humor. But how do you deal with that? Because at any point they can do vindictive or reactive things at any stage, right? That's always there simmering in the background.
Yeah.
How do you deal with it?
I think in Sri Lanka, and I don't want to like contrast this with India because I don't know enough about the Indian media environment. I can make some kind of educated guesses, but I will tell you what it is like in Sri Lanka. I think we as a media group, as a sports writing group, we kind of rally around each other very strongly. So if there's any threat from SLC against anybody in the media environment, there are like leaders in the Sri Lankan media pack. I'm talking about people like Sadi Taufik, Rex Clementine, Damindu Jayasuriya, plus others, who will take SLC to task, who will say, even if they don't have a particularly good relationship with that particular journalist, I think we know, like, once they start splitting us off, once they start splintering us, then it's a bad scene for all of us, and I think no one has cut those deals yet. The kind of older and kind of the older generation of journalists have really stood by younger writers who have taken those risks. And the younger ones, now I'm not so young, but like have also like taken that on. And it's not just me who writes honestly about SLC. I think Rex Clementine, others in English, just in English, have written very, very harshly. And so it's not like I'm going out on a limb. I know that there are other people in the media environment here who very much are on that same vibe. and I also know that they won't abandon me, because I've seen other journalists who haven't been abandoned, who are once someone goes after them, the people get very angsty towards SLC and say, if you're doing that to them, then that we've written. I remember one stage we'd written a letter collectively and all that kind of stuff. We put pressure on the board to never do that stuff to anybody. And so that's been really helpful. And also the fact that, SLC is nowhere near as powerful in the world of cricket as the BCCI, that also is helps level the playing field in our favor.
Is the reaction to cricketers in Sri Lanka usually as cool as you described it? Like, is it as muted as, because in India, we have these very well publicized instances of people showing up at cricketers' houses and stoning them and, burning effigies and all sorts of violent forms of protest and so on. Does that happen in Sri Lanka as well? Or, is there less of that? And so maybe that also contributes to, cricketers being a little bit more open, to building these sorts of relationships.
I think probably the one cricketer, or maybe the two, that broke that was Kumar Sangakkara. I just remember times when I just saw him being mobbed, this is at the height of his powers. This is like 2014, 2015 kind of time, and maybe a little bit earlier too. Just after the Cowdrey lecture and everything, I think he's the one cricketer who most was unable to kind of like go out. But then you'd also see him at like, Colombo restaurants and stuff, just having a chilled out meal with his wife and a couple of friends, or like whatever. There was no issues. It's just like a very public place, a public place that's perhaps like, because of the price point of the restaurant, out of the reach of most people, but still like, still in public, like happily living his life mostly. And I think that I remember like him telling me a story of one time playing the IPL and him going to a mall with a couple of people, or was it him or someone who was with him? His agent was telling me the story, where they'd gone to a mall together and had gone into like a shop to buy something for their kids, and then they came out. There's just like a wall of people, and they had to get. I think he was playing for Punjab, or I can't remember, or maybe Hyderabad at the time. I can't remember. And they had to get the team security come and take them away. So I think he's probably never had an experience like that, or very rarely had experiences like that in Sri Lanka. So it's and we're talking about, in my writing time, like from 2012 onwards, he's the player who most had this kind of appeal, this mass appeal. And so I think for most people, like it's not uncommon to see a cricketer like going about his day at a supermarket. And also these are like, again, like Sri Lankan fans are very fickle, right? Like if you just came back from the Asia Cup and you're the man of the series, or if you've just done something really special, then you will have a little bit of attention from when you're out in public. But if you haven't done anything in a while, you're just like kind of middling performer, and you've just kind of then there's probably not going to be, you're probably able to like, go to the fair on a Sunday and buy vegetables for your family to eat. Like it's not, it all depends, I think. And even now, Kumar can probably go out without too much issue, because his kind of like most popular, like, he's no longer the kind of like the hottest cricketer on the planet. There's but maybe one in the Hasaranga can't. I don't know. I haven't had that conversation. I haven't seen him anywhere, but perhaps he would struggle now to go, but that's like very limited, the rest of the team very much can go somewhere, can be in public, can generally live their lives. They're obviously a person of kind of popular interest, so there's going to be some buzz about them. It's not as if they're like nobody, but it's not crippling.
In Hindi, now that IPL is going to take over the rest of your cricket calendar, 55 in Hindi is Pachpan. Okay, Pachpan, as said by like a South Indian, is usually like analogous to Bachpan, which means childhood. So let's jump tack a little and tell us about where were you when Sri Lanka won the 96 World Cup, and did that have anything to do with you sort of jumping into cricket before you got like close to rubbing shoulders or bellies with Malinga and Herath? Where were you? What is that?
Sorry, just want
But-
to add to
yeah.
that question. There's a big conspiracy theory in India that we all believed in. And I mean, some of us continue to believe in when we are suitably
It's
high.
true.
Is it
How
It's
Jayasuriya
true.
bet?
It's true.
Yeah,
Jayasuriya
yes,
bet.
it's true. It's not
It's
a
true.
conspiracy.
Yeah,
It's not a
I've heard
theory.
I knew it.
See,
I knew it.
the
Here's the
violent
official
opposition.
admission, guys.
It's
SLC
actually
has
there's
endorsed this.
look, you guys are way behind. It's actually not even what was the thing in India that it was a metal bet?
Spring.
Or
Spring in the
yeah.
bed.
Springs in the bed. Is actually nanotechnology. Sri Lanka, Jayasuriya went forward in time to like 2075, got like amazing nanotechnology, put it in his, of all the things he could do with the technology, he's like, no, I'm just gonna like, there's so many like, reasons to things that I could do to like benefit humanity. He's like, no, I'm gonna score 340 against India at the Ketharama Stadium. That is my goal. So he put it in his bet and he came back. Yeah, that's definitely the inside story you're looking for. But no, I mean 96. I think everybody who was old enough to remember, I was 7 years old at the time. I had just got into cricket over the previous summer. There was that very kind of acrimonious Australia tour that Sri Lanka went on where Murali got no ball. That's when I really kind of like, when suddenly it became clear to me that cricket matters, because adults all around me who were previously only talking about the war and like bombings and all this kind of stuff that's happening in Australia, suddenly everyone was incensed, but it wasn't about the war. It was about like cricket. And that was the first time I really started taking notice and really started like getting into it. Roshan Mahanama, by the way, one of my first favorite players, because he was like a fantastic fielder at the time. And then it was like 96 World Cup, obviously like a dream to go through as a child. No one really expected.
We have the opposite. We have the trauma from 96 Fidel.
Also a dream, but of a different kind. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean. There's this like I remember coming home from school, that India Sri Lanka semi-final match, right?
Yeah, we all do.
I remember. Yeah, and I'm sorry to remind you of that, but whatever. I'm actually not sorry. I'm happy to relive that.
It was
game.
our forbidden fruit at the Eden Gardens, basically.
Yeah.
But sorry,
I remember coming home from school and I was coming like there was a TV in a corner shop that like a group of kind of like uncles and aunties were watching the match, right? And as the school van that was dropping me home rounded the corner and near that corner shop, I saw them like groan, and I knew, by the way, I was trying to get home to watch the match, so I was like watching the time. I knew it had started, and I saw them groan and like hands go to heads. And I knew, and I was like, crap, a wicket has fallen. By that stage, someone had told me that Sri Lanka were batting. So that one wicket. As I got out of the van and was like kind of going into my house, again another big groan went up from the shop. So I knew that like 2 wickets had fallen. And then I went in and I was just like kind of like, I was like really worried because obviously Jayasuriya and Kaluthan had been the guys who were like pushing had been like spectacular at that World Cup, and they were like the ones that had the big buzz about them. I didn't really know at the time as a 7-year-old much about Aravinda de Silva. I'd heard parents talk about him be like, a great player, or adults talk about him being a great player. But then I just remember watching that Aravinda 66, like almost like I was like, had my hands over my eyes because I didn't want to, like desperately didn't want them to lose another wicket. And just watching that 66 and being like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And I still think in terms of innings, if I could be at a single Sri Lankan innings, and I've seen some great ones myself, thankfully, like because of the job. But if there's a single Sri Lankan innings that I could be at the ground for, it would be that 66. Wow. So that was fantastic. And then I remember Sri Lanka winning the World Cup. I don't have so many memories of the final itself, apart from like the end when kind of Shane Warne, who was like a big antagonist in Sri Lanka at the time, of being hit over the boundary by Arjuna Ranatunga dismissively. But I remember going to school the next day and no work was done. The teachers only wanted to talk about the match.
You speak as if this is very abnormal for Sri Lanka, that no work is done during the during the felling of jackfruit trees.
Point.
And like
fair point. This is a very fair point. we take every occasion, every opportunity not to do work. So, but I remember for like 3 days, nothing happened apart from talking about the match, and it was such a moment of like national pride for us in the middle of a war happening and everything. Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to kind of like. I think every kind of child who went through '96 and remembers it, kind of, there is something that cricket will always do for you, because like nationally it was such an important time, and we loved it.
So Fidel, just on the like not wanting to work bit, right? I just remember this. I think it was one of those epic matches between Federer and Nadal, and there is this blogger from India called Karthik S, who has a blog called No Entuda, where he writes about Nadal and the Ranatunga principle, right? Basically, Ranatunga's whole philosophy was, if you can walk a run, why run it, right? So his sort of analogy was to say, like, there are important and non-important points in tennis. So, like, let those go, but like fight hard for the ones that are there. So it's not a culture of laziness as much as extreme efficiency, right? Because like very famously they won that World Cup.
I mean, I also really enjoy Ranatunga since then. So every time there's like a focus on fitness in the Sri Lanka team, someone will get like the grand old fat guy of Sri Lankan cricket, Arjuna Ranatunga, on a TV show to comment on whether fitness is really that important.
That's amazing.
Like, so every time, like when Mickey Arthur was
sponsored by McDonald's,
we have, so Fidel, we have in India, unfortunately, because of the way politics have been going in the past 5-10 years, we have this thing that every argument can be reduced to, but there are soldiers dying at the border, right? So once you say that, once you invoke soldiers dying at the border, you can't say anything else. So I think Arjuna is like that for cricket, I guess. But what about Arjuna? Arjuna did it. Like
Arjuna's like the same thing, but for cricket fatties. Yeah, like he's cricket.
That's awesome.
But no, the argument he always makes is, look, cricket's a game of skill. If you want fit people in the game, then why don't you put 11 models on the field? And
wow.
Ashwin agrees.
Which we tried during the first few seasons of the IPL, by the way. Like cheerleaders and whatnot. It didn't work.
This quote came literally 2 days ago, right? Like Sunny Gavaskar, who's famously,
the fittest Indian to ever play cricket.
Who uses fitness when convenient. He came out in defense of Sarfaraz Khan 2 days ago.
No, Sunnyji's point is different, right? You have to always tuck in your shirt while you're playing cricket. And the only way you can tuck in your shirt is not embarrass yourself, is having a reasonably,
so basically, the only way
he's consistent, dude.
The only way you can tuck in is by tucking in.
Yeah. Good one.
Anyway, I love that. Like Sunil Gavaskar's making a fashion point, and then like the background of the fashion point is the fitness point. It's like, no, you don't have to be fit to play cricket, but you have to be fit to look good playing cricket. Like that's the important thing.
You think it's hypocrisy, but it's deep layers to his personality, man. Like no one's given Sunnyji, the commentator, the respect he deserves. But take offense.
I do think I actually really like Sunil Gavaskar's commentary. When he's not commentating about India, he's actually very, I mean, it's like a whole different commentator.
I thought you were going to say he makes Russell Arnold look better, but that's...
Hey, Russell Arnold, by the way, is at his best when he is commentating about India.
Yes, he's got a few jabs in. The last season, last series, and I think previous times, he's really kind of got in. He's got a few good singers, Russell. I like his.
I love him. I love him when he does it in Tamil. So he does some work for Star Sports Tamil. And it's so cute, and also like
Chris Srikanth and Russell Arnold doing Tamil commentary is when cricket peaks.
So I have a question, Fidel, which I think you've inadvertently brought up right during the whole 96 memory. Through the war, multiple things happened, and one of the centerpiece of it was Murali in his peak ascendancy, and then a whole nation rallying behind him. And you mentioned this in your story from the Cricket Monthly, which says growing up with Murli. You said that there's a point where you go to New Zealand and you find that the Murli naysayers have suddenly like grown along and all of that. What is it that you feel, right? Like, how do you see Murli as a force, right? Like, because one of the things that's obvious to me is because he came along, there was this whole slew of mystery bowlers. You had your Ajanta Mendises, you had your, even today, to your Vanindu Hasarangas and Lakshan Sandakans come around. So he created a revolution. But in the backdrop of the war, being an ethnic Tamil, also that Murli was, how do you see cricket went through that period?
Yeah, I mean, Murali's location as a Tamil is like fascinating. It's almost like an ethnographic study for an anthropologist, like a research project in itself. And Murali, the way that Murali was seen in Sri Lanka, because he's a Tamil, but he's a Malayalam Tamil, which means like a Tamil of the mountains, for people who don't speak. It's like basically like recent migrants to Sri Lanka who used to work in the tea plantations, right? So his I think his grandparents are probably from Chennai, right? Like India could have had Murali, like in another lifetime. Murali could have been an India player,
and Nasir Hussain. Let's not forget
Nasir Hussain.
Yeah.
India.
I don't know if Nasir Hussain would have made the India team, but I think we can be safe that Murali would have.
Well,
like
Ashwin's
I love
still
Nasir
playing
Hussain.
T20s and all. So.
Yeah.
It's attempting to be the right arm Herath, as Srinath would say. But anyway, let's go back to Murli.
So I mean, the thing about like that Tamil community was not the community, that particular Tamil community was not the Tamil community that kind of from whom the separatist movement came from. So it's not like his particular Tamil community were. That is not to say that that was understood by the Sinhalese public. The Sinhalese public certainly at the time had a very rudimentary knowledge of Tamils of the island. We probably very, very arguably still do in this country. We don't understand each other anywhere near enough. But also just Murali had been in teams where he played with Sinhalese. He spoke Sinhalese with a Tamil accent, but pretty good Sinhalese. Could crack joke in Sinhalese and all that kind of stuff. And so he was kind of like, he almost became like in the Sinhalese public's eye, almost like a good Tamil, right? Like one of the good ones. And of course, like, he was used as a political tool all his life. He sometimes, usually unwillingly, he had nothing to do. All he wanted to do was play cricket and just be himself and be authentic. And one thing that, of all the criticisms you could level at Murali, you could never say that he's an inauthentic person. He's just himself, and he doesn't hide it there. He doesn't really play any kind of manipulative games. What you see is what you get with him. And he's just a guy who wanted to play cricket, but of course he was walking into a political minefield, and he always would be. And I have a lot of sympathy for Murali for that. However, the other side is I certainly don't endorse the way in which he's lived his political life. And later on when he knew better, young Murali, I have a lot of sympathy for. But it was strange because I remember, a part of my family's Tamil as well. And I remember him being used by lots of Sinhalese people as evidence. Arjuna's backing of Murali. Arjuna backed Murali very, very strongly during the 90s, with the chucking controversies. And Sinhalese people used to always say, look, Arjuna's treating Murali so well, and backing Murali. The Tamil cause surely this is like evidence that the Tamil cause, or like the separatist cause, is a load of crap. And of course we know, we all know that it's way more complicated than that, and there are way more issues than that, and that there was like serious discrimination happening. But he certainly, like, inadvertently, without him doing anything apart from playing cricket and being good at cricket, was used as a mascot for certain political causes. So
Fidel, I mean, 2 points, right? One is that I don't think to assume everyone knows is fair, because like I grew up in Kerala, very close to Sri Lanka, right? And like it took me almost like 35 years to realize the complicated history of Sri Lanka. When I finally read Saman Subramanian's This Divided Island,
Yeah,
I have your book. I'm going to read it very soon, but I haven't gotten to it yet. But the opposite thing that is happening, right, is that you mentioned how Jayasuriya went into the future to 2075 and did this. In like the lasting memory of what reading someone's book did to me was to say this is the exact same thing that is unfolding in India, right? Like we know what is going to happen and how people are going to justify it years later. But basically, there is a good Tamilian, there is a good Muslim, there is a good non-Hindi speaker, all of that happening here as well. And I just wanted to reference that there was actually a Tamil movie that was supposed to come out about Murli, which is called 800.
With
basically all of the Tamilians actually protested, saying no, Murli is not actually a sort of figure you should hold up, precisely because of what he said, right? Because he didn't sort of support the political cause. So I mean the opposite is also sort of playing out in some respects, that the later Murli is probably not getting some of the credit that he deserved for being a fantastic bowler and trying to exist in an ecosystem which basically didn't want anyone from an outside sort of background.
Yeah. That movie is still coming out, by the way. Vijay Sethupathi is no longer involved in the project, but as far as I understand, Shehan Karunatilaka co-wrote that film.
Oh wow!
Nice.
Pretty cool.
So I'm fairly certain that film is like either in post-production or currently in production. Like it's not long. It is coming out at some point. It is being made.
Oh wow.
I think Murali.
Amazing. Who's playing Murali? Do you know?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I think it probably has to be like a less well-known. I guess like Vijay said, he occupies a certain space in Tamil cinema, and because of his profile, he wasn't able to play like a controversial figure such as this. But that film still is coming out, and hopefully, I know from chatting to Shehan, I know that he did capture a lot of these nuances and contradictions within Murali's character. I don't know to what extent. I think he handed over the script, and then it's kind of up to the director what they do with it. I don't know to what extent those complications and things have been retained. But anyway, we'll see when the film comes out.
Tony, how can you ask this? When you don't know who is playing someone on screen, the answer is obvious. It's Kamal Hassan. It's always Kamal Hassan. You don't have to ask.
No, hey, we'll just
either a character, either a statement.
we need to just insert the Vishwarupam background music at this point. Transition.
I think just to finish that, it's strange, right? Like some of the biggest Tamil blockbuster movies of this era are produced by a Sri Lankan Tamil who owns Laika Productions, right? And they also own a TNPL team, and I had to get that in.
Kovai Kings.
And an LPL team.
LPL team as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Jaffna Kings owned by Laika.
Fidel, I want to ask you about a particular cricketer who's like a current favorite of mine, and he's one of those favorites who will frustrate you no end. If I have to make you take a guess with just that, who would you guess?
Dhananjay De Silva.
No, actually, it's Niroshan Dickwella.
Oh, Dickwella.
Obviously, dude, Dickwella. I am Dickwella, not De Silva. Please, Fidel.
I'm Dickwella, not De Silva.
Amazing reference. Yeah. If listeners haven't heard, go and watch that YouTube video. It's fantastic. I was in the room for that, and I was in stitches. I was in the room for that, and I was absolutely in stitches.
This is Asghar Ali Mubarak from Pakistan. And my question is regarding your batting. You played well at this condition and pitch. Are you thinking 100 on this pitch?
You mean me?
Yeah.
I'm not De Silva, I am Dickwella. I got out. I'm already out in the pavilion. Maybe second inning,
So tell us about him. Like, what is going on with him? He, on the face of it, he seems to be like this amazingly talented batsman who can't get past 30. And he seems to be very good with his hands too, while keeping his appeal has like it's a work of art, right? It's jazz hands.
Yeah, it's one of the great appeals of all.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's like I think he's like he went to the same school as Kumar Sangakkara, and Kumar Sangakkara, one of the great over appealers of all time. And Nirjan Dikwela thought like that is the guy, and I'm going to put that appeal on steroids, and that's going to be me. And that's what he does. I mean, it's like if you watch Kumar Sangakkara appeal and Dikwela appeal side by side, very similar. Like one hand goes up, and Dikwela's just got like a little bit of extra to it. You know, it's like if Kumar went to a choreographer and like they just put like a little bit of like spice into it. That's you end up with the Dikwela appeal, and Dikwela appeal is also much more like I think. The Sangakkara was a bit more like judicious with at the times he would over appeal, whereas I think Dikwela is just like all over appealing all the time, like no breaks, everything's just like all thrusters firing. I think he's one of the great, like again, like one of my favorite people to write about as well. One of the great characters in Sri Lankan and in just world cricket. Just because he's so, and you know, like some of the reviews that they take based on his like you're just like there are times I've just wanted to like throw myself. Press boxes are usually 2-3 floors up. I just want to throw myself off like the front of the press box so I don't have to watch it. But then he does something amazing, something like you just can't. He's one of the cricketers that you can't take your eyes off him. Yeah, and he makes cricket such a watchable and fun sport. Because you just don't know what he's going to do, but you know that it's going to be something crazy, and there are people who hate him and people who just love what he brings to the game, and I don't know which I am. I think I am like a bit of both. I like absolutely adore him, adore the fact that he's part of like what makes cricket great. I think he's and also there's just like so many like narratives around like he hasn't got to 100. There are some innings where he just bats really well with the tail, like amazingly well, like shepherds the tail, like super responsible. And then the next innings, you're like, oh, he's turned a corner, like he's now become a responsible player. Next innings, he comes and he charges a bouncer, and then like top edges it to or like toe ends it to mid on, and you're just like, what happened to the guy from literally 2 days ago? What happened to that guy? It's just like it's always a roller coaster. One of the players who doesn't like me, by the way, or recently hasn't like. I remember one time getting on a plane somewhere. It was like after the India tour, and the whole team was on the front. I didn't realize that they were there. And Dikwela made it a point to just like, as I was boarding the plane, I was heading on to economy. They were in business. As I was boarding the plane to kind of talk to or like get my attention and tell me that he didn't like my writing on that tour, and I had been like a little bit critical of him, but it was, and I was just like, I was very like annoyed that someone was like, no one likes being yelled at in public. I think cricketers should know that best of all, and I was like a little bit, but I also like, if only he knew like how much love I had in my heart for him also, like, how much like, it's like at that moment, yes, I was a bit annoyed, but in general, big fan of what he brings to. And I hope
through the millions basically like Dikwela was the same person who said, what a great bat you have. We don't get bats like this.
Can I borrow your bat? Can I borrow your bat?
And therefore, in the era of stump mic cricket, how has the keeper's responsibility changed? Like he's no longer just like there to like fulfill a function of keeping, right? We replace Saha with Pant purely because Pant is way more entertaining behind the stumps. Fidel, what do you think? Has that changed? Like, is being a keeper also about being and auditioning for commentary spots now?
Oh, possibly. I think Dikwela would be I would love to hear Dikwela's thoughts on cricket. Like that should be you should get him on this podcast. I think that would be insane. No, he's that's just his personality. Like he just I don't think like it's a show of any kind or an audition of any kind for Dikwela. That's just who he is, and he'll just like say whatever comes into his head, no filter, just does what he feels like doing, which is what makes him so watchable, what makes him so entertaining. I remember that one match in Kolkata actually when I think Sri Lanka were like 6 or 7 down. India were pushing for a win on the last day, and he gets into an argument. I think it was with Ishant or Umesh Yadav. I can't remember who the Indian bowler was.
Slightly more Ishant.
Yeah, he gets into a big argument, and he's like fully throwing him into himself. So you think like, oh, this guy's running hot. He's just like he's lost control of emotions. And then you hear in the Sinhala what he says to his partner. His partner's like, calm down. His partner thinks the same thing, like, Dikwella has kind of lost it. And you hear him say to his partner, like, chill out, dude. Like, they're wasting, I'm helping them waste their own time. It's fine. Yeah. Just like completely playing the game. You like, it's fine if we get an argument. It just means one less over for us at the end of the day. So it's he's that kind of guy who'll just play. Yeah, he'll like do anything to win. Also like gets into trouble, or has frequently been very close to getting into trouble. Yeah, definitely.
But it's a kind of lovable trouble as opposed to the.
Yeah, it's like he's like the artful dodger of cricket. Like he's like. He's like one of these lovable rogue. Yeah.
So through the millions of listeners of Bits and Pieces, we want to throw it out there to Niroshan Dikwella. Andrew Fidel Fernando is a big fan, and so are the rest of us. So please don't yell at him next time when you see him.
It's okay. I don't mind that he yelled at me. I got a story out of it. We can roll with it.
Hey, at this point, Tony, we should insert that audio clip of Dikwella telling Bairstow he plays for the money thing. That should be
playing for cash only. That's
playing
the line.
For cash only.
Not playing ODIs, playing for cash only.
Amazing. Love him.
You know why he has been dropped? Yeah. Dropped from the India tour. But going to play the IPL, playing for cash only. Oh, he's a good player of spin boys. Wow. If you have some time before the next series, would you mind teaching me some shots? He's the best in the business here, boys. You don't get good bets like this. If you have a spare one.
So I wanted to ask you about, I think, a book that we hold in very high regard in this podcast, War Minus the Shooting. And you've talked about this, obviously, on 81 All Out, and one of the things that, and there's so much we can talk about that book, right? I mean, we can just keep talking about that book, especially given the context in which all of us grew up, watching cricket, and the 96 World Cup was such a central part of that entire, growing up thing. But one thing that really stuck with me, I think this was you on 81 All Out when you were talking about it. You talked about, I think, coming to that book late, which a lot of us did, that we read the book much after it was written by Mike Marquesi, right? And it's almost like, you see things that you might not have seen if you read it as a 7-year-old, as an 8-year-old, or as a 13-year-old at that point. Whereas if you read it for the first time as a 30-year-old or whatever it is, right, you connect back so many more things. And I think it was you were talking about sort of the experience of that being so much different from if we'd read it, initially and so on. So one of the things that I was thinking about also was, this probably would happen to us if we came to cricket late in life as well, right? So like Mike Marquesi himself, right? He writes about it in his earlier books. He came to cricket much later in life, right? So, and I don't want to put you on the spot. You can think about this a little bit, but is there something specific, like a specific player or a specific part of cricket that you think you might have enjoyed more or enjoyed differently if you would come to it, let's say, as a fully formed adult, at 30 or at 35, versus if you grew up with it, like starting from as a 7-year-old who watched Sri Lanka win the World Cup and all of that, right? So, I mean, I keep thinking about this basically after listening to you talk about it on that podcast, right? That how does this alter fundamentally the experience of how we experience the sport that we love and so on? And this is to all of our panelists, by the way.
Yeah. So, Kart, while hopefully Fidel can have a minute to think about it, one of the things that blew my mind, which was not from War Minus Shooting, but from Jared Kimber, was that we always talk about Jayasuriya Kalavitarna from the 96 World Cup, right? Whereas Kalavitarna has actually only scored 73 runs in that World Cup. Yeah. And his average was 12. and his highest was 33 against Kenya. That is definitely not how I remember it. And like
the rest
when
of his
Jared
average
said it-
is from is thanks to Tony Greig. Yeah.
yeah, but like when Jared Kimber said it, I had to really go back and see. Like, wait, like was my memory playing tricks on me? So yeah, sorry, just to set that up in terms of how we perceive things versus how they probably are.
Yeah, that was a tough question, the first one. I'll talk about Jayasuriya Kalutharana first to like slightly redeem Ramesh Kalutharana. When Sri Lanka made this decision to pair them up at the top of the order, they did it first in Australia. And Jayasuriya like failed on that series. But Kalutharana scored 350.
He didn't have the spring back then,
and I think Sri Lanka won. Jayasuriya didn't have the nanotechnology. He hadn't gone back in time yet, or gone forward in time yet. Kalutharana was the guy who carried that opening partnership through that series, and because he had done well, and because I think Sri Lanka had won the matches in which he had made such an impact, that was the reason they decided to keep it together during the World Cup. So Kalutharana kind of like laid the groundwork for that World Cup. Obviously, Sanath Jayasuriya is, clearly the better opening partner since then, and obviously, like history has been changed by Jayasuriya rather than Kalutharana. But yeah, Kalutharana definitely played a role in that. As to what I would think differently about as an adult, if I had come to it, later on, I think maybe like something like the bouncer, and kind of like now we are much more safety conscious, right? Like particularly since Phil Hughes' tragic death and everything. I kind of wonder to some extent. Yes, it's part of the game, and like I'm very much like a bowler. I think bowlers are better people than batsmen, better human beings than batters, right? I will say that out loud.
Except when they're Nilesh Kulkarni and Manoj Prabhakar.
Even them, it doesn't matter. If you decide to kind of bowl a ball, like that is a much more punishing life for you than a batter's life. Batter's life maybe perhaps mentally punishing, but I think like maybe I would have, I because I'm someone who grew up with this sport, the bounce is such a fundamental part of it. But perhaps I would have different thoughts on it as someone who kind of doesn't want to see people get hurt. And maybe that is the thing. I don't have different thoughts on it because I know the role it plays in cricket, and bowlers very much need it to kind of like have that fast bowling, at its best, is just, I remember watching, great fast bowling performances, and Dale Steyn, and like, Steyn bowled one of my favorite test spells that I've ever seen live. I watched that Wahab versus Watson thing in the 2015 World Cup.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And was, like blown away by how electrified I felt while watching it. And it is a beautiful thing, but I do wonder, like, we're putting, we now have better concussion protocol and all that kind of stuff. But like, should people be really concussed? Should really be people be concussed while playing a sport? Perhaps as a more kind of like safety conscious adult who now has kids and everything, do I want to put my kids into a situation where they possibly get concussion is a possibility? Should people be concussed playing a sport for other people's entertainment? Perhaps I would have a different view on that topic if I had only come to cricket as an adult.
As always, New Zealand not getting the attention they deserve. So
you were gonna bring this
up.
I will turn to Fidel very quickly, because I think one of the good things about Fidel's writing is, one, obviously all the Sri Lanka body of work, but he's also produced in parallel New Zealand body of work, and I say that over a decade, not just the Kane Williamson nice guys period of this. He's chronicled them from being the Whingers and the Sledgers from the 2011 World Cup and even before. So Fidel, it would be nice to hear
the flash in the pan where they briefly tried to posture like world champions and all that. Shit team, but okay, Fidel. You're a
Fidel,
nice guy. I shall give you the benefit to explain.
Now that you know both the extremes, it'll be nice for you to talk about your association with New Zealand cricket and what gets you writing about them so frequently.
I mean, I partially grew up in New Zealand, so there's like a natural affinity between ages 10 and 23. I was there. My family moved there when I was young. So I was in high school, university there. So I saw the whole. I followed New Zealand sports teams in general, and when I started my sports journalism career, I was actually writing a lot of rugby because you can't be a sports journalist in New Zealand and avoid writing about rugby. So probably for most of the year I was writing about rugby, and then just a few months of the year I was writing about cricket. And yeah, I mean, there's a natural affinity and kind of an understanding and an appreciation for what goes into New Zealand sports, and also just an admiration for a country of 5 million now, but 4 million for much of the last decade.
Are we talking about sheep or people?
No, if you're talking about sheep, there's it's like India's population. They're everywhere.
Which has recently crossed China, by the way. So get used to 3 IPLs in a calendar year.
Everyone knows the 3 main population classes in New Zealand, right? It's basically sheep, followed by Richard Hadley, followed by Dibbly Dobblies, right? So those are the 3 main classes.
I thought you were going to say sheep people and sheeple, whom Tony says are the New Zealand fans.
And just having seen their rise in world cricket has been pretty fun to watch and unusual, and I think like something that is to be admired. I used to think differently about it. I used to be much more cynical about it, and I've written kind of cynical pieces about New Zealand too when they changed their image from, when Brendan McCullum at the start of his career was a bit of a prick, and I think he probably would admit that. And McCullum, obviously the guy who has changed New Zealand's image the most, and changed New Zealand's fortunes the most as well, in a cricketing sense.
And England's apparently.
And so much that like England were like, we want a piece of that, and they paid him a lot of money. Yeah. So I remember kind of being skeptical about their transformation from, they had a brief period of ascendancy, but also for a team of their resources to have a brief period of ascendancy is not, for even a brief period of ascendancy is no small thing, I think. And for a while, they made 2 World Cup finals and were, beaten in one of those in very kind of like very contentious circumstances, let's say. And they won a World Test Championship. Like, what do you want? What do you expect from a country that has 5 million people, in which cricket is by far the second most popular sport? I think you've got to give a little bit of credit. There is a genuineness about their transformation, which I was cynical about, but later, as I found out more about it, I talked to Brendan McCullum for a long form feature I did just before the World Test Championship final, and Mike Hesson, and kind of them introspecting and them really changing themselves to kind of get their public on board. That is a cool story. That is something that I really admire about what has happened in New Zealand, because they genuinely did just look at themselves and think, we're kind of like being a bunch of crybaby assholes on the field, and let's try and change that and try and play in a different way. And then just to see the appeal, the broad appeal that has had across the world. Yes, they're not all nice guys, like they're all, they've Hardik
Pandya was not hit wicket.
But I do think like Kane Williamson is a very authentic person. He's someone who doesn't really have a public persona and a private persona. I think he's just who he is. So there's a lot to like about them, and it's nice. It's nice after writing about it's a really nice change from writing from Sri Lankan cricket, which is chaotic and broiling, and just like there's just like crap happening all the time, and the board is a mess, 90% of the time, and there's just like it's like basically like a tornado, and then writing about New Zealand is just like sailing on calm seas and just like observing something that's like so peaceful and kind of like things are as they should be. So it's like, it's a nice contrast to have to write about.
What I dislike about New Zealand cricket is that people make it out to be like the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, which is like, I don't know, 1420, some 100 volumes, like Chaminda was his name, right? But actually, it is more like out of the blue, the inside story of the unexpected rise and rapid fall of Liz Truss. That is what New Zealand cricket is all about. Like, they were lucky for like about 49 days. That's it, dude. It's a
they were pretty
team.
they were pretty good for like between 2015 and 2020. They were a solid team. That's a 5 years of
Liz Truss did not
like
last as long as a lettuce, as YouTube tells you, right?
Yeah. I think that's a very unfair take. That's New Zealand cricket did some very fun things for a while.
Fidel, I'll pull you back and reference one of the most frequently referenced stories that you've done, and it's one of the great narratives within the whole team itself, and that's Ross Taylor and his rise back from eye surgery, which I think a lot of people did not know until you kind of wrote about it in detail. Fidel's pieces was one of the first I read, at least.
Okay, I think there are a lot of New Zealand writers who had covered it, so I don't want to give myself too much credit there. But yes, I kind of like tied it into the rest of his batting, I suppose, to some extent. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say like that's one of the great stories, because Ross Taylor essentially went toe to toe with peak ODI Kohli, which is again a less appreciated aspect of New Zealand cricket from the mid 2010s. So just talk a little bit about Ross and
yeah, I mean, I think he's one of the most fascinating New Zealand cricketers that ever has been. He's a supremely nice guy and kind of like as chilled out as he seems on the field. But obviously, like I remember an interview with him. Shoot, when was it? I think it was just pre-pandemic. It would have been like 2019 when New Zealand were touring Sri Lanka. And I knew, I mean, he's half Samoan, so he's got Pacific Island heritage. And the kind of social context in New Zealand is that, Pacific Islanders not known to produce great cricketers for a start, right? His middle names are Luteru Putua.
Yep.
Something else.
Lote
Taylor. Yeah. So like and someone who's very kind of conscious and proud of his Samoan heritage. And I kind of guessed that he had some battle stories, but I think an agent had told him, look, don't tell like an interview that you're giving for free to Cricket Info. Don't tell them like this juicy stuff.
There's a book here.
And I kept, there's a book here. Do it when there's like, money on the table. And obviously if I was him, I would take the same route. But I kept kind of like pressing him on that. And he kept telling me, look, that's for another time. That's for another time. That's for another time. But obviously there are some stories there. And I appreciate that those stories in his book have come out about, we talk about New Zealand being this kind of like almost, in the international kind of political sphere, we talk about New Zealand being almost like this utopia where post-racist society, but I think, and New Zealand being this super nice team and super accepting all that. And I think Taylor's narrative is something that we really need to take note of. And he has spoken about the discrimination he felt during his career. And I love that he has come out and told that story eventually. And just a fun batter to watch too. Like, I really enjoyed his, and he was a bit, it was a bit sad because probably at the start of his career, he was kind of, the narrative was more about, other like New Zealand being a bad team, and Taylor was kind of like a really high performing player in a bad team. Daniel Vettori was probably the player that most people were talking about during that period. Then it went into kind of like Brendan McCullum being the player that most people were talking to. And then it went to Kane Williamson, the player that most people. Meanwhile, like Taylor had like like his body of work is pretty impressive.
Immense. Yeah.
The only thing that you probably didn't reference explicitly is the acrimony with Hessen and McCullum. It's almost like he became the underdog among underdogs by the end of it, right?
Yes, yeah.
Wasn't he captain at some point, and he had to give it?
He was. That's the big kind of controversy in like public controversy in his career, was that he was playing a test like very close to where I am right now in Gaul, And there was a Galle test and a Colombo test to follow. So it was a 2-set series against Sri Lanka. And what happened was Mike Sandel, and who is a fantastic guy, by the way, and still New Zealand's manager, and I think Mike Hesson had decided. Mike Hesson had played with McCullum in Otago and kind of knew McCullum well and thought of him as captaincy material, and was very keen on having McCullum as captain, and wasn't a fan of Taylor as captain. And perhaps, you could say in retrospect, their views have been vindicated. However, they told Ross Taylor, before the series, in a hotel room in Galle, that you're going to be dropped, you're going to be replaced as captain at the end of the series, no matter what happens, right? And that is a pretty harsh thing to put somebody through when they're away from home and kind of like had been doing the captain. And New Zealand had some tough times. I think they'd lost at that stage 3 tests in a row. Weren't doing well in ODI or T20 cricket either, and so it was a tough thing to kind of kick somebody. And obviously we later got the narrative. Martin Crowe, who was one of Taylor's mentors and closest friends, burnt his New Zealand blazer over New Zealand sacking Taylor. And Taylor scored 100 in his last test as captain, by the way, which New Zealand won in Colombo. And there was all this kind of there was a big. And there was a lot of turmoil, and I think he took the next series in South Africa off. To kind of like process all of this. He's I mean, like, the man's got some battle scars. I think we know that, and so it's a fascinating career. And because he's a New Zealand player, probably if he was an England player, he'd probably have like 7 books out by now. But he's a New Zealand player, and it doesn't quite work like that. So it's I think he's had a very, very fast, as a writer, there's just rich material there to write about, right? So these are the careers that, like, if I'm being like very very almost opportunistic as a writer, these are the people that you want to write about.
I want to ask you about the Sri Lanka coaching musical chairs. Like, there's always some churn happening somewhere. There are 2 Australians, 1 South African, and perhaps one Sri Lankan as the bowling coach in the mix. And it's never like you can ask someone at any point in time, who is this Sri Lanka main coach, batting coach, fielding coach. I'm sure nobody can get it all right in one.
It's always Graham Ford.
Graham Ford and. So what's the deal there? I mean, is it just the board being impatient? Are the players, I don't know, too harsh with the
from LRPL to LPL, basically?
Tony, I'm going to make your parents happy again, and my parents happy too, by referencing the Bible. By referencing the Bible once more. There's this very famous thing that like Jesus said, that's like, don't why are you looking at the beam why are you looking at the speck in your brother's eye when you've got a beam, like literally a beam of wood in your own eye, right? And that I think is like a great metaphor for the Sri Lankan board, right? They're like,
I thought you were taking a pot shot at Dravid, which is
me too. I thought he was going there.
This is what the board's kind of attitude towards their coaches is, because Sri Lanka's domestic cricket has been terrible for a long time. It is now improving. I have to say that it has been. At the moment, they're playing the National Super League, which is like a team with a 4-day tournament with fewer teams, and there's like a concentration of quality there. But for the longest time, but it takes a while for domestic kind of like domestic tournaments to start producing players again. Whereas for the longest time, Sri Lanka's first class tournament was 24 teams, right? For several years. And for a country of 22 million people, of those 22 million people, there are parts of the country that have never produced international cricketers, right? And so they're part of the country that are kind of don't have good cricket infrastructure. So really, you've only got like maybe max 15 million people that play in terms of like producing international cricketers. And then for a country of that size to say our first class system is going to be 24 teams. It was a two-tiered system. So I think the top tier was 8 teams. Oh, sorry, top tier was 14 teams, and then the second tier was 10 teams. It was a two-tiered system, and there was some concentration of quality towards the top tier, but still, it was a bad system, and Sri Lanka's administration has been broken for a long time because of a constitution. I've written about these, but I'm not going to go too much into detail at the risk of boring your audience. But basically, domestic cricket was very broken. Yeah. And every time Sri Lanka went through a bad patch, which was a lot since the retirement of Mahela Sangha Dilshan, that group of players, basically 2014 was Sri Lanka's great year, won the 2014 T20 World Cup, the Asia Cup. Yeah. Won a test series in England, all that kind of stuff, and then there was like a rapid falling off. And during that year, they just started even before that actually, but during that season, they just every time something went wrong with the team, the board's first response was to replace the coach. They tried everybody, and they didn't realize actually the coach can only do so much when the domestic system is producing so little. And the coach can't upskill players who are barely first class level to playing against Steyn and Kohli and Smith and Stark and all these players when you're producing players who are barely fit to play first class cricket in many of these countries. A lot of Sri Lanka's first national players who are coming through some of this period probably would struggle to play in a Shield team in Australia. And so when there was the Sri Lanka cricket's response is to replace the coach, which is obviously, and also they have had to pay a lot of money in compensation. By the way, they ended some of these contracts early, and legally they weren't allowed to do that, and they've had to pay compensation for that. So yeah.
To wind up, Fidel, I have 2 questions for you. The first one is an optional question. You don't need to answer it. Which is Varnakula Surya Pada Bentige Ushanda Joseph Chaminda was the longest name in Sri Lankan cricket, or do you know something longer?
I think there are longer ones. Yeah, there have been longer. I can't remember the guy. Even Herath.
Herath is longer.
Herath Budiyansalage, Kirti Bandara.
You missed the Rangana.
Rangana, right? I miss Rangana. Kirti Rangana Bandara Herath is, I think, longer. Yeah. HMRKB Herath. I think there's I think there's a domestic guy who has a 150 letter name, I think. I can't remember it right now. Yeah.
Yeah, but the second one is, and I think you obviously, like a sane person, have not listened to all episodes of Bits and Pieces. But one of our sort of great sort of aspirations as a group is to watch a test match in Sri Lanka, specifically in Galle. And I, as a person growing up in Kerala for the first 20 years, have only spent 2 days in Sri Lanka, but it blew my mind, right? And this is what I wrote back on Jan 14, 2018. It's not a long thing. I basically said Sri Lanka is like Kerala with great beaches, ubiquitous greenery, kick-ass food, but with better alcohol, much wider roads, and more colorful trishaws and infinitely politer people. Sri Lanka is like Kerala after smoking a really good joint, right? And you feel really strongly about Sri Lanka, both the bad and the good. I happened to read, the 52 piece that you wrote, which is Hunger, which is obviously about the dark times that Sri Lanka is going through, but also you've written a full book about Sri Lanka. So maybe, if you can take about 5 to 6 minutes, depending on how much time you have, to tell us about what Sri Lanka is like, why we should come there, probably about diving, whatever you want to talk about, man.
Visit srilanka.com.
Yeah, Upon a Sleepless Isle, the book the paperback is coming out soon, by the way. So I'm just going to do a personal plug.
Woo!
So that'll be available everywhere. But about Sri Lanka in general, I mean, I think to some extent, Sri Lankan cricket is like a microcosm of it. All the bad and the good, there's horrific administration, there's horrific government, in the same way. The Sri Lankan cricket is best understood as a an arm of the Sri Lankan government because it's so tightly controlled by political interests, right? And so Sri Lanka cricket's like maladministration, everything that I've kind of written about Sri Lanka cricket being actively working against the interests of the sport in the country is also true. Like I'm making some generalizations and kind of like simplifications here, but is largely true also for the government. And then beyond that, you still have this incredible kind of like country that is, Sri Lanka still produces these moments of incredible joy on a cricket field, even in the midst of that terrible 2014 to 2020 period in which 21 period in which Sri Lanka was like a truly abysmal team. They produced the greatest series they possibly have ever played, test series in South Africa when they won a miracle test in Durban and then backed it up in Port Elizabeth by like dominating South Africa over 3.5 days, which doesn't like no other Asian team has won in that country, right? No, only England and Australia I think have ever won in South Africa.
Rub it in.
Yeah. Look, you guys get to brag about the Australia wins. Look, this is what we have. Okay, this is what we're bringing to the table. So like they're still, despite all of this turmoil, you still have these moments of like unbelievable creativity and rising above circumstances. We saw that this year as well, with like huge protests. How many countries can say that a popular protest chased away a strongman president? Like it is almost unthinkable. You chased him away. He was in fear for his kind of safety. Yep. He fled the country, despite this man being like having like crazy links to the army and the military. The scale of the protests that happened was truly. I was there. I was there at most of the protests. I was, I think
you said that was your happiest cricketing day at Galle.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it was. I was covering a Galle test in July, on July 9th, and watching everything that happened in Galle. I did not write. I was there to write about cricket for Cricinfo, but then I went up into the Galle fort because all this other stuff was happening. And I think I wrote in my piece that day, I wrote maybe like one line about the cricket, and the rest was about what was happening around it. Because you just could not help but be swept up by it. And it was incredible to live through. I think like it's a country that continues to surprise you and no one really understands. And I think having written a book about it and having written all these long form pieces about it, the more I know about it, the more I realize I don't understand. The more fractures, the more like nuances I discover. It's a country that has like so many diverse interests and is so, and I talked about like Sri Lanka fans being fickle, but Sri Lanka itself is a very fickle country. It changes from day to day, and you as a single person cannot be across those changes. And it's important to kind of like keep all of that in mind. It's a constantly chaotic and intoxicating place, and I absolutely love it, obviously, and I both love it and
hopefully we'll come meet you in Sri Lanka, Fidel, and hopefully you don't run away. Definitely give you advance notice so that you can run away. But thank you so much.
And once they cross the 900 mark, hopefully you have a bit of beer ready for us.
Lion beer.
Yes, exactly. One of those throwaway lines in someone's book is how lion beer has chased away tiger beer.
I remember that line.
Thank you so much, Fidel, for spending so much time with us to talking to us about what Sri Lankan cricket means. Sri Lanka itself means you to have the courage to sort of go into these uneasy stories and bring back like laughter for all of us, but also shine light on an entire sort of amazing nation that is not well understood. I'm talking about New Zealand, of course, but also thank you. And for bits and pieces, let's sign off here. What's been an amazing episode 55, I want to say, not 952 of Bits and Pieces. Thank you for joining us, listeners, and hopefully Fidel will be back again with his much closer friend, Nitin Sundar, who couldn't make it today, unfortunately. But thanks, Fidel, and thanks to all of our panel. This is Tony signing off on behalf of Srinath, Kar, Samir, Chops, and Fidel. Say bye, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.
Later. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
Fidel.
again for having me.
Thanks,
Thank you, Fidel.